Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Film Score podcast, and welcome to the new year. Welcome to 2024. My first interview of the new year is with Frédéric Yonnet, and I think this is actually my first interview with a non-composer, although Fred, of course, does songwriting and performing. And I guess you could say Fred is like a harmonicist, harmonica player for the stars. Among others, Fred has toured and performed with some legendary musicians like Stevie Wonder, Prince, Ed Sheeran, John Mayer. Look at the show notes or the landing page on my site for a longer list. The amount of people he's played with, he performs with, he tours with is unreal. Although you might not have heard of Fred before this, I guarantee you've heard his music and certainly know the people that he's playing with. But all that aside, why is he on the Film Score podcast? And that's because you can hear his harmonica in The Irishman and, more recently, Killers of the Flower Moon. He was picked out by Scorsese and composer Robbie Robertson to lend his harmonica to the film's score. And it adds a really excellent, interesting flavor and texture. Of course, if you've seen the film, heard the score, you know that. So Fred and I dig into his collaborations with so many artists, all as a build-up to talk about his work in film, particularly The Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon. Now, of course, you can find out more about Fred on his website, social media. You can do the same for me. After this interview, I'll be taking about a month break or so before the next interview comes out, although always a chance you'll hear from me before then. Until then, however, sit back, enjoy this new year. Fred, thank you so much for joining me today. How have you been?
I've been wonderful, Nick. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I'll be frank, I was not familiar with your work as a harmonicist prior to the last, week or so ago. Reading about some of the people that you've worked with, watching your Tiny Desk concert with your band, it's like, wow, this is impressive stuff. So,
very cool.
I do want to get into your work playing the harmonica on the scores for The Irishman, for Killers of the Flower Moon, but I think being a harmonicist is a bit unusual. You don't hear a lot of people that are playing that instrument. So I wanted to ask you how you got into that in the first place.
Well, it's interesting. I think the instrument, to be honest, the instrument picked me. It shows me. I mean, look at this thing. It fits in your pocket. It's very inexpensive. It's easy to find even at a hardware store when you need one. So it has a connotation of being a toy. And that's really how I got into this. I grew up with asthma as well. And I was always carrying an inhaler in my pocket and a harmonica. And the more I was playing this instrument, the more I was leaving the inhaler at home. So it helped me feel better, understand my breathing abilities, strengthen my lungs, and basically enhance my health and also expand my social network. I started making a lot of friends. I mean, there's something mystical and magical about this thing disappearing in the hand of the player, and then all of a sudden, all these sounds are coming out of, nowhere. It's like a trick. It's like an eye trick, so it was an easy choice.
But that wasn't the first instrument you were playing, was it?
Correct. I mean, we all grew up with a harmonica somewhere at some point as a child. Yeah. But musically, I was driven I fell in love with music through the drums. Playing the drums was really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the guy who was surrounded with all these sounds. And I also wanted to lead the band. So I started to listen to band leaders singing on the drums too, like, Art Blakey and Max Roach and Billy Cobham. And I later found out that if you wanted to be a drummer, most people would hire you to follow the band, not to lead it. So I got fired from a lot of bands from trying to lead from the back. And that's where, I figured I started listening to some pretty elaborate music. I went from listening to pop, processed food, to going into the organic food market, which is, fusion and jazz. And that completely blew my mind. And I realized that this instrument was not really featured in the music I was really in love with. And that's where I saw that there was an opportunity there to actually lead a band, lead a live band with a harmonica.
So without those sorts of examples of other bands being led by a harmonicist, how did you come up with a sort of a structure or a instrumental mixture or sound that you could lead with that instrument, but that was also going to feel organic and work and make sense?
Sure. Well, I started as a sideman, as a harmonica player as well, where I was hired, to play in bluegrass and country and blues bands. So that helped me to sharpen my skills as a harmonica player and develop, a palette of sounds, for lack of a better word. And then I started including playing with all these colors. I was like, it was an easy decision to actually use all those techniques and all those colors I was using as a sideman to start to actually paint my own pictures. And that's what I think you recognize when you listen to my music. You will hear an inspiration in gospel, in jazz, in R&B and everything, but you will also feel like there is a main distinct voice that is using all this vocabulary to tell its own story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting as well, the sounds that, not just the notes, but the tones, the timbres that you're able to get from the harmonica. Because I think, and you touched on this earlier, a lot of people's experiences with the harmonica are either as kids, because like so many people, I had one when I was a little kid as well, or hearing it in like a western, a country, a bluegrass setting where it has a particular role. So how have you been able to expand the range of the sound and the notes of that instrument?
Well, you're making a very interesting point, and I'm going to answer your question. The question
Sure.
being, let me rephrase it before I forget it. The question is, how did I expand the sounds of the instrument?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think it comes from a deep love for the instrument, but also it comes from a vision for the instrument. It comes from the fact that I realized that the harmonica was mostly anchored in its past. It really didn't have a vision in the future. Most harmonica players have been listening to, and the majority of them, I mean, there's of course, a few that we can list, but the majority of them are trying to reproduce what has been done and replicate what has made them fall in love with the instrument in the first place, which I completely understand and completely respect. But it is very challenging to find the space for the harmonica in its future. I think having a clear understanding of its potential and being excited by its potential versus looking to reproduce what has been done has really been the drive behind all this. The desire to take it from where it was and push it where it's trying to be, following the instrument. In other words, it's really a question of freeing your mind so your heart can follow.
How did you get to that point? Because as you mentioned before, you were initially in playing as a touring musician, session musician for those country bluegrass bands that, in my view, are rooted in the harmonica's past.
Correct.
So was there a moment that in your mind or in your playing kind of triggered the let's look forward instead of look back?
I think it's a natural thing. Everybody gets excited by the new. At least I am, and I'm sure you are as well, because we get excited about, what's coming new on the market. And the same with live music and recorded music. Every time there's a new album that comes out, there's something exciting. What did they come up with? My passion for the drums led me to listening to music that is forward thinking. And I guess it helped feed that desire.
And I'm sure that forward-thinking mentality is a big reason why you've gotten to the place that you're at today. And looking at the list of some of the other artists, musicians that you've worked with, whether performing, touring as a session musician, I mean, it is such an absurd list. You've got like Stevie Wonder, Prince, John Mayer, Erykah Badu, John Legend, The Roots, Usher, and that's scratching the surface of all of these legendary contemporary musicians. Did you ever expect to be in that position, and did it ever feel surreal to you being on stage with Stevie Wonder, for instance?
No, absolutely. I mean, every moment I shared the stage with Prince or Stevie, I felt like I had the best seat in the house. There's no doubt about it. I had the best seat in the house. I always love to say that it's like living a dream before you get to dream it, you know. But to get to that point, 90% of it was preparation. You have to be prepared, you have to practice, you have to sharpen your skills, you have to get ready for any opportunity so that when the opportunity actually presents itself, you can deliver the best, your best, and make sure that whoever is expecting you to do so is satisfied.
And what, if anything, was that initial opportunity for you that kind of opened the floodgates into creating the career that you have today?
I guess the main milestones, first, picking this instrument was a huge one, of course. Deciding to quit my day job to just, dedicate most of my time practicing and playing in jazz clubs in Paris and to meet as many musicians as I could and, stretch myself to being able to deliver the best in any opportunity possible. That was another one. And then meeting my wife was definitely a big event in my life and in my career. When I met her in south of France in '98, and we got married in the US in 2001. I mean, she's a PR goddess, so of course we work very well together. I'm very creative, and she knows how to guide my creativity and how to enlighten me into some things I'm overseeing, and we go back and forth. So we're two very creative spirits. That is another one, and of course meeting somebody like Dave Chappelle, who is a musician at heart. He's the one who actually introduced me to Stevie and Prince. And both of these artists then took me on the road with them for 3 years. And Dave introduced me to a lot of artists. He's been extremely supportive. And then, now I have my own friendship with these geniuses, including Ed Sheeran, who I've met through Dave. But Ed came to my show at the Blue Note a few weeks ago to surprise me and the audience. And we jammed on stage for a good amount of time. So, it's a combination of things. It's a beautiful recipe, and it's amazing to watch it unfold.
Oh, I bet. And I do want to touch on some of those experiences, but going back to what you'd mentioned a second ago, of one of the key things was actually quitting your job, performing music full time, because I think a lot of people that do listen in are musicians, composers, but they're maybe not necessarily at that point where it's something that they can be doing as their career, as their job yet.
Sure.
And so for you, how did you know that the time was right to leave your day job and pursue music full time?
It was actually a Wynton Marsalis interview that really struck me. I can't remember which interview it was, but I remember hearing him say that there is a lot of musicians who are going to want to do exactly what you do, and in his case, a trumpet. And the only thing that could make the difference between him and the other trumpet player was the time he would invest into building his own sound and his own tone. And it really struck me. It really hit me deep, and I realized that he was right. And in my world, there's a lot of harmonica players, and most of them, once again, are spending a lot of time trying to sound like their idol. And I understand that very early, and I decided to invest into developing my own sound, which till this day is really a fingerprint. As soon as you hear one of my notes, it's me. And it's very, very hard to develop, to craft for any musician. So that was my first. That's always been my focus, but it was a very early decision that I'm glad I made.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's clearly worked out. And on that note of creating your distinct sound, are there ever instances where, if you're performing with somebody else, touring with them, playing with, pick whomever, Prince, for instance, where Prince is at the forefront, it's his band, that you have to tone yourself down to defer to the band leader, the main musician?
No, I think you really have to surrender your judgment to the leader. In Prince's case, one thing that really stretched me. We used to have hours long rehearsals, and he would polish my placement in some of the songs during those rehearsals. And when it was time to perform on stage in front of 30, 50,000 people, he would call me on songs I had not rehearsed and not practiced. And the songs I was ready to go and deliver on, he would call somebody else to take the solos. So it always it always messed with my brain a little bit. But I understood later what he was really trying to do. He built that muscle in me, or at least he helped me realize that muscle needed to be strengthened and built, and deliver the best whatever the opportunity is, and don't try to script it so much. Just go straight with your spontaneity and what you feel in that moment. Surrender to the moment, surrender to the music, get out of the way.
And it seems like that's one of the beauties of seeing live music, where there is the spontaneity that you don't know what might happen, who might be playing what they might be playing. Not that there's anything wrong with playing through your songs, your albums as they're recorded, but that is something that's, I think, always exciting when you don't know what might happen and the performance surprises you.
Absolutely. There's something I actually learned to recognize that fear is actually not another defense system, not only another defense system, but it can be, especially in the world, in the live music world. I believe that fear is a sign of evolution. It's a sign of change. Whenever you're experiencing the anxiety, it's because the environment you're used to is now taking a shape that you have not anticipated. So now you have two choices. Either you're going to let fear block you and go back to what you're familiar with, or you're actually going to surrender to the environment and see what happens. In most of those cases, option B is the most thrilling and the most satisfying. And that's the moment you talk about afterwards. That's the moment the audience feels the most. I remember people telling me when they see me perform that they really appreciate the amount of freedom that they're experiencing as a listener because of what's happening on the stage.
On that note, do you have for you, a most memorable performance?
I think I remember probably most of all of them. The ones I'm really looking forward to listening to are actually those particular moments where I really decided to. I can recognize it when I listen to it again. I can recognize, oh, this is the moment where the music was taking a weird turn. And I'm so glad I took that turn with it versus trying to guide it, in a different direction. Those are the ones I am, and with my guys, with my musicians, we are the most excited about. Those are the ones we talk about the most. The other ones, we try to forget them. Whether the sound was bad, whether the sound engineer didn't know what he was doing, or I picked the wrong harmonica, or grabbed it upside down. That kind of things happens too. But we don't talk about those moments.
No. And with those, are there any other artists, musicians where those types of the positive experiences where it goes a direction you don't expect, that's more common? Or do you think is it more common when you're playing with your band?
No, I think it's common with it happens with most of everybody, but you can also see and feel. I think you are naturally attracted to and naturally attracted by musicians who have the same desire to explore with you. The most scripted musicians will be looking in a different direction, and so will you.
See. And I'm sure in that case, the approach that you have or that somebody else has, they kind of gravitate toward each other in ways that are complementary. Right. That I imagine you're going to be, less willing, less interested in performing with someone where it's going to be by the book, scripted, here's everything we're going to do, and there's no deviation from it.
I mean, of course, there's two sides to this business. It is a business, and you have to multiply your sources of income if you want to sustain your living. So, if you are contracted by somebody who's very scripted, you have, again, to surrender to this and deliver the best in that environment. That's the contractor's Fred Yonnet. Now, when it comes to my project, my preference is, of course, the investigation, the freedom of, let's see where the music takes us. But again, one feeds the other and vice
Mm.
versa. It's like, it's basically two opposites of the same energy.
And on that note, where you're surrendering to someone else's project, and as we mentioned earlier, you've been a musician on the last two Martin Scorsese films, where Robbie Robertson was the composer for both The Irishman, Killers of the Flower Moon,
That's right.
and from the film composer perspective, you're already in the position where you're surrendering yourself, your music in certain ways to the film, the vision of the director. For you then, are you in sort of one more step of surrender where Robbie Robertson, for instance, Scorsese are your vision, your artistry is deferring or subordinate to whatever they want, whatever they need?
Absolutely. I had the pleasure of meeting Robbie Robertson at a party in the Hamptons at Larry Gargosian's house. And we had a beautiful conversation about music, but I had no idea. I didn't realize who I was talking to be honest with you. It was a casual meeting. Everybody was really cool. And nobody was wearing their name tags. So fast forward to maybe a year after we actually met, and they reached out to us because they were looking for a harmonica. He and Scorsese had clearly determined that the harmonica was going to play, the sound of the harmonica was going to play a role in The Irishman. And they wanted the harmonica to be this kind of, like Grim Reaper, almost like the Darth Vader march, in Star Wars. Every time you hear that, you see that character, you hear the sound. Where in The Irishman, every time something bad was going to happen, you would hear the harmonica start to roam around and take the lead in the score. They reached out to us and they wanted a very, like studio session musician. We explained to them that what I do with the instrument is not common. I can play like a studio session musician, but what I do with the instrument, and I'm going to try to tap into this very briefly on the technical side after I tell the story. I explained to them that I morph the sound in a way that most harmonica players do not. And we send them some samples. Once they heard the samples, they decided to switch from wanting a chromatic harmonica player to going with this diatonic harmonica player. Now, technically, the chromatic harmonica is basically two harmonicas in the same body. It's a harmonica in C and a harmonica in C sharp. There's a slide that you push on the side to go a half a step and switch basically harmonicas in the same instrument. And that's what Stevie Wonder plays. You always see him with his big harmonica and he kicks it on the sides. It's because he's actually pushing that slide and goes a half a step. Same with Toots Thielemans. Both of those people have grown up listening to religiously. But the harmonica I picked is called the diatonic harmonica. It only has half of the notes of a chromatic scale. So in order to deliver the missing notes, I have to basically torture this instrument with a technique that comes from my throat and my tongue, and I create artificially the notes that do not exist to then match the scale that will be delivered by a chromatic harmonica. That allows me actually to bring some more texture, more emotions, more grittiness to the sound. It allows me to sound more like a violin, like a guitar, like a drums, like a human voice. All the sounds come from the magic of the diatonic harmonica. Stevie is probably the only chromatic harmonica player, to my knowledge and to my taste, who I think can come anywhere close to this. So when Robbie and Scorsese heard what I do with the diatonic, they decided to go with me. Then I think it inspired them also to create another character in Killers of the Flower Moon, which was again impersonated by the sound of the harmonica, and that is the sound of greed.
Having the harmonica first be the sound of death and then the sound of greed, I mean, were you surprised that that's what they decided to pair the harmonica with? Are those things that you associate the instrument with?
Absolutely. It was greed and loss in Killers of the Flower Moon and death and conspiracy in The Irishman. all my intention, I mean, my drive towards this instrument is out of passion, out of love, out of fascination for it. So when I met Scorsese during the premiere in Cannes, I introduced myself as the harmonica player on the tracks. He was like, "Oh my gosh, you're the harmonica master." And we had a great connection. And he explained to me that he grew up listening to the harmonica. His grandfather, I think, played the harmonica, so he has a deep love for the instrument. And none of those characters impersonated by the harmonica in the movie are anywhere close to my personality. So I had to ask him. I said, "Mr. Scorsese, what is it about my playing that makes you want to kill people?" We had a great laugh about it.
Love it. That's great. So let's take a step back. For the Irishman then, when you were first brought in, what was the recording or the writing process like for you?
I went to meet Robbie Robertson and Jared Levine at the Village Recorder in LA. And basically, they let me pick the instruments, the microphones, and the preamp combination that I thought would work best for my instrument. And then he already had some very clear ideas of what he wanted to hear. So they had given me some demos that were just played by a MIDI keyboard. So I was prepared. I learned the melody, I learned the placement and everything. And Robbie gave me basically 3 words to focus on. He said, "Be sexy, be cool, and be sneaky." That was the only guideline he gave me on the spiritual level. Musically, I was supposed to stick to the script, but they also asked me to be a little more creative with the interpretation and to put more of my sensitivity in the playing. And those were the tracks you're hearing now on the score.
And with that, so it was just you being recorded, or were you there with other players as well?
Now, for the Irishman, it was a live band.
Okay.
Everybody was here. Yeah. George Doring, Jim Keltner, I think it's Reggie Hamilton on bass. So yeah, the whole band was recorded live. For Killers of the Flower Moon as well, it was Rocco, and I cannot think of his last name to save my life. I'm sorry, the guitar player. I know his first name is Rocco, and he has an Italian last name. He will come back to me as soon as this interview will be over. And I'm sorry, Rocco, if I can't. But anyway, we played live, yes. Mm-hmm. There's one track where I re-recorded on top of the band because I wanted to have an opportunity to play a little more loosely.
And so then with Killers, what was your conversation with Robbie like, or what, if any, was his guidance for the sound that he wanted to hear?
For Killers, we discussed the gravity of what the Osage tribe went through, what they experienced. I had only heard about the story just slightly on the surface, and so we went deeper into it. We did some research and tried to imagine what it was like. I mean, Robbie Robertson had himself some Native American, some Native ancestors in his family, so it was something that really was extremely meaningful to him, and it is something that is so timely. I mean, look at what's happening around the world right now.
Yeah.
It is amplified to its nth degree, but it is still something that is very current. So I was trying to basically, once again, surrender to the emotions, surrender to the directions, and try to connect what those emotions meant to me on a sonic level. As musicians, we like to, I believe, we like to create a palette of colors and a palette of emotions. And we use, just like a painter, we use those colors to create a picture, to create a scene, and that's what happened during that session.
And did it take time for you and the other musicians, the rest of the band, to gel and find that the right sound, the right colors?
No, it was immediate. It was immediate, and I think it's because of 2 things. First, the musicians are extremely seasoned. I mean, we're talking about Jim Keltner. I mean, he was talking about how he had met Jimi Hendrix while he was, eating a sandwich. I mean, it was absolutely an amazing session. So no, these guys they've done it all. But it also I think was because of the direction. It was a very clear, very strong, and Robbie Robertson was extremely clear about what he wanted to achieve but he also had a very sharp method as how to achieve it and still give us the freedom of expressing ourselves with our own voices, which is not an easy thing to do. And but there is a scene where you see the main character. She's experiencing something absolutely gut wrenching, and she's walking by the side of the river towards a crime scene, and as she's walking, you can see the emotions being drained off of her face. And she's losing her balance. She's falling in the arms of her husband because it is a terrible, terrible moment in her life. And at the same time, as you see Lily Gladstone perform that particular scene, you hear my harmonica very intricately underlining her performance. And it is a perfect match. That scene, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, as a matter of fact, because when you witness it, you completely forget. I completely forgot that it was me playing it. I mentioned it to Scorsese, and I said that scene was absolutely beautiful. And he proudly started to tap his chest with his finger, and he said, "I did it that myself."
Well, and on that note, that brings up something that I was interested in as well, where for a film's composer, they're composing the music to picture, and they're getting various edits of the film, and so when the film is done, they generally know exactly how all the music is going to work in the film itself. But for you, and I think that example shows it perfectly, you don't know how that's necessarily going to be. So that example aside, I mean, were you surprised at how the music ended up being used and your playing in particular?
Absolutely, especially that those moments, it was gut wrenching. The thing I discovered during that process is that the movie was being shot at the same time as the music was being
Mm.
recorded. So basically, Scorsese's process is very interesting. He shoots, he asks for some ingredients that can potentially match what he's shooting, but everything else is happening in the editing room. So it's basically once he has both of these ingredients, he starts
Mm.
collapsing them, and basically the story is telling itself. So I believe, I mean, I might be jumping ahead of myself here, but it feels like he as well is surrendering himself to the story so that the story can tell itself with both the film and the music.
Hmm. So is this, to take a step back? Obviously, it is really tragic that Robbie had passed away earlier this year,
Mm-hmm.
and yet
Mm-hmm.
it's also the bittersweet aspect of him being able to release this score that for a great film, great score that's getting wide acclaim. And so obviously that's a friendship, a relationship that has unfortunately been cut short. But do you have an interest in working in other films, working on other film scores, provided that it's the right opportunity for you?
Oh, absolutely. I think I think the instrument works absolutely perfectly for a situation like this one. I worked on the oh gosh, what is that song with Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga?
A
Um,
Star is Born.
The Star is Born. Thank you. I worked on I worked on The Star is Born. There is a scene, the wedding scene, as a matter of fact, where you can see both characters putting some cake on each other's nose. Where I was the band.
Hmm.
Um, I was in the back. In the director's cut, actually, you hear some of the tracks we I produced for the movie. Two things. I feel like the harmonica itself has such a wide range of sounds and textures that can really be associated to anything the director is connected to. It's not about me in those moments again. I am not greed. I am not the Grim Reaper. Obviously, it's not nothing that I am, but it meant something to somebody. And when I saw the end result, it was a perfect match. So yes, the instrument is has a beautiful range of sounds it can deliver for any kind of visual aspect, and I love to be the guy behind it to deliver it.
Well, and I think there are a few instruments like that seem like they can be very appropriate in the right circumstance if used the right way. You can see behind me I feel the same way about classical guitar and film music as well.
That's what
So
it is.
yeah. And so being able to hear something else that adds something different to the palette, a different texture, is to me always really exciting. It's always fun to hear something different, not just because it's different, but also because of the different dynamic, the different dimension it can add.
Right, and then and exploring the new.
Yes.
That's so exciting. I mean, you can beatbox with this thing and still have the harmonica create some chords in the back of it. You can sound like a crying baby, or you can really do there's such a wide range, or you can sound extremely happy. As a matter of fact, I see when I do some master classes or some sessions, in a high school, I notice that I play differently and the harmonica sounds differently
Mm.
because I want to make sure that the children connect to it. When I play for somebody older, somebody in my family has a birthday or something like this, I'm going to play a little more mature. So it is such a, it does give you a lot of potential if you spend the time, expanding your thinking around the instrument. And that's really, I think, what it's all about. Expand the way you think about the instrument.
Absolutely. And I don't know, I frankly I hope you don't do this, but if you ever look at like the comments to your Tiny Desk concert, there are so many of them that are people just awed and baffled at the different sounds that are coming out of your harmonica. And so I think that's great that it's opening people's minds and eyes to how this instrument can be used in different exciting new ways. And then the possibility of, if you take it a step further, what other instruments can this be done to? Or is this possible for everything?
Mission accomplished. I love
Yes.
to hear that.
Well, Fred, it was really great chatting with you, and frankly, it was also just great hearing your music, listening to some of the cues from both of those films, some of the songs from them, with an ear towards your playing, because it really does unlock something different as well. So it's really exciting stuff. So thanks again for joining me, for chatting with me today.
Nick, it was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too.